Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to talk about the Irish work permit landscape. If you're involved in hiring in Ireland at all at the moment, it's impossible to escape without coming across candidates who require some sort of work permit. I'm joined today by the excellent Dale Chen from Future Direct Ireland. Dale is our go-to expert on any questions work permit related. I've yet to come across any question that Dale hasn't been able to answer with the highest level of expertise. So today we'll talk you through. Dale is going to present just an overview, really, just to help simplify the work permit system in Ireland. We want the session to be very interactive, so we will invite you to submit Q&A through the Q&A function, and yes, we'll answer them as well as we can. So we hope you find this very, very useful. So Dale, just before we get started into any of the presentation piece, can you tell me what prompted you to set up an immigration support services business?
Thank you, Stephen. Well, that's a really good question. Myself, I originally come from China. My family and I came here around 20 years ago. And as you can understand, we have gone through the immigration process ourselves personally, and I was able to understand the pain point and the procedures that was involved. And that really encouraged me to set up a business that can help more people to understand it better.
Very good. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction just about who we are, and Dale will also do a quick piece about himself. So Russell Tobin, we're a global staffing company, US headquartered, probably one of the biggest recruitment agencies in Ireland that people haven't heard of. We set up here about 2 years ago. We're part of a company called Pri Global, which, as you can see there with the countries in red, we have a truly global presence. We have a lot of different brands, all focused on the delivery of human capital solutions, really. Russell Tobin being the biggest brand within that. We've about 1,000 people globally. We span across 4 different continents. Within that, we have companies where we do like light industrial, we have a healthcare brand, we do BPO, we do employer of record services for a number of our global clients as well. Just give you a sense, we are truly global in terms of some of the companies we work with. We would support across several countries, across several continents, but we also have specialized local teams that focus on delivering specialized recruitment services within each country. Typically, the type of service we offer our clients, we do our traditional permanent hire recruitment, we do contract contingent workforce management, we do embedded RPO, and we also do recruitment coordination as a service. So typically the areas where we do provide, I suppose, specialism in would be things like accounting, finance, industrial, IT, pharma, scientific, engineering, and also on the sales and marketing side. So before today's webinar, I was just really looking through some of our own data, just really get a sense to the extent of the problem. It's something in every single client that we engage with, the topic of work visas come up. So looking back to last year, I saw that there were more than 30,000 work permits issued in Ireland, but it was to more than 7,000 different companies. So there are a lot of companies out there who were really engaging in the process. The majority of these received 3 or less permits. So it's not just the big multinationals who are availing of these. Companies across Ireland of different size and different industries are getting involved with it too. It certainly looks to be picking up quite a lot this year. There are already 5,366 applications just in February. I had a look through as well our own data regarding job applicants. So last month alone, more than 61% of those applicants we received for jobs were highly skilled, reasonably well qualified for those roles. They were already based in Ireland, and they were candidates who had a stamp 1G, a stamp 4, or a critical skills visa. So that's just a little bit there, a bit of context and background, I guess, to us. the problems we're seeing or we're coming across their clients. So I'm going to hand over to Dale, just give you a quick introduction, and he'll do a very quick presentation, just really on I suppose, the simplification, if that's possible at all, of the work permit system. So over to you, Dale.
So, thank you again, Stephen, for the introduction. My name is Dale from Future Direct. I'm the founder of the business, and I'm the senior immigration consultant here. So we provide immigration support service to HR professionals, recruiters, and employers. We enable you to hire non-EU nationals by looking after the visa process for you. And I've been in the field for over 8 years, and our office is currently based in Sandyford in Dublin as well. So as Stephen has alluded to, I'm sure we would all agree that Ireland and the European Union is facing a huge skill shortage across many sectors, ranging from healthcare, engineering, IT, hospitality, and much more. And as a result of that, we see so many foreign nationals coming from outside the European Union to Ireland to work. And in fact, the Irish government has also recognized and acknowledged the skill shortage because in January this year, they've expanded the visa application system to encourage more non-EU workers to come into Ireland. In addition to the global talent pool, let's not forget that in 2023, there were about 35,000 or more international students who have graduated from third-level courses across Ireland. And most of them are eligible to join the labour market under a Stamp 1G visa. And we are seeing increasing demand for visa sponsorships for these graduates as well, because they would want to stay in Ireland and work for the long term. So when we look at the statistics for 2023, as you can see that the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment Permit has issued over 30,000 employment permits for non-EU nationals across close to 7,000 Irish employers. And you can see from the chart there, 32% employment permits were issued to healthcare, 16% to IT, 14% construction manufacturing, 8% hospitality, 8% finance, and 22% in other industries as well. And as I mentioned earlier, this year we're expected to see a significant increase in the employment permits being issued. So what do we see from an employer's perspective? What does a typical case look like? So generally, an employer would receive quite a number of applicants who are Stamp 1G holders. And most likely, as I mentioned, they will be graduates, non-ENA national graduates from Irish universities or colleges. In these kind of situations, as a HR manager or a business owner, do I pursue it or do I avoid them? The short answer is they're definitely worth considering, because under the third level graduate scheme offered by the Irish government, the non-EEA international students who graduate from a master course would be able to avail of 24 months of a Stamp 1G. And if they graduate from a bachelor course, they would avail of 1 year, 12 months of Stamp 1G. And the Stamp 1G enabled them to work immediately. And it allowed them an opportunity to explore the job market and enabled them, once they have secured a permanent job or a long-term job, they can then apply for an employment permit. An employer should consider the Stamp 1G because they can work immediately, such as joining a graduate program or completing a standard probation period. And once that duration is completed, then the company or the Stamp 1G holder can decide whether they want to commit to an employment permit application. And let's say if they do want to proceed, and having completed the graduate program or probation, they do want to proceed, how does the process look like? Well, first they get hired, whether that's through internal or external recruitment process. And if you want to proceed with, let's say, Future Direct being assisting in the application, what we will do is we will engage with the recruiter and also the employer from the onset. We will check the candidate's profile as they go through the recruitment process with Russell Tobin to ensure that it meets the requirements for the work permit. And if there's any risk or if there's any flags to be raised, we will make sure we raise it at the onset of the recruitment process. And in a scenario where a job offer is being made and we want to proceed with the work permit application, then we will then step in and look after the process from start to finish. And that process, as you can see there, takes about 2 months, 1 to 2 months, depending on the type of employment permit you're applying. The government fee is about 1,000 euro. It is 1,000 euro for a permit duration between 1 to 2 years. And once the employment permit is approved and the person is already in Ireland, then they can transfer straight away to a stamp 1, which allows them to continue to work in Ireland for the long term. In certain cases, let's say if you are hiring a non-EU national that's outside of Ireland, who's not a graduate that's already in Ireland, but someone if you were to hire from abroad, in those cases, you may have to apply for additional step, which is called the entry visa. And that will depend on the nationality of the individual. And the process takes additional 1 month to process, and also the cost around 60 euro payable to the Irish embassy in their country of residence. So in general, the lead time for the work permits and the work visa process is shorter if the individual is already in Ireland, let's say on a stamp 1G. And they're about 1 month in addition to it if they're currently outside of Ireland. I'm sure a lot of us have heard about the different types of permits, and the two of the most common one is the general employment permit and the critical skill employment permit. So let's look at the critical skill employment permit first. It's probably the most desirable permit type. The current processing time is about 1 month, and there are generally 2 pathways to get a critical skill permit. If a person's occupation is listed within the critical skill occupation list, which I've listed some of the occupations there, such as engineering, IT, and they have a relevant 3rd level degree, and their salary is above the minimum salary requirement for a critical skill, which is 38,000, then they will be eligible for a critical skill under the first pathway. So that is the job title, the relevant 3rd level qualification, and 38,000 or more. Then they'll be eligible for a critical skill. The second pathway to a critical skill is for some senior level positions where the salary is above 64,000. In those cases, then you don't have to consider the job title having to be on a critical skill occupation, and they don't necessarily need to have a 3rd level degree. If they have the relevant qualification or experience, it's fine. So that's generally the 2 pathways for critical skill. And then if none of these pathways work, then you would most likely fall under the general employment permit, which most jobs actually would be eligible for. The general employment permit usually takes 2 months because there's an additional step and procedure involved called the labor market need test. And the entry requirement for a general employment permit is slightly lower. You just need to have an eligible job title, relevant qualification or experience, and the minimum salary requirement is 34,000 for a general employment permit. And I've listed some of the occupations that we've processed quite a lot in the area of healthcare assistant, carpentry, welding, HR and operations, or hospitality managers. So having said all that, let's look at some examples to make it more relatable. So let's say if a company want to hire a software engineer who's been offered a salary of 38,000 or more, and the software engineer is currently a graduate who's current in Ireland. In this case, the software engineer would have a relevant 3rd level degree. He has a valid visa in Ireland. The salary is above 38,000. And the job title of a software engineer, if you remember from the last slide, falls under the IT sector. Then you know he's eligible for a critical skill. And once the critical skill is approved in a month's time, then he'll be able to transfer it to a stamp 1. And bear in mind, because he's on a stamp 1G, during that entire process, the individual can be still working in the company because the stamp 1G allows them to work while the employment permit is happening in the background. So there will be no interruption to their job. A second example, looking at a different sector, let's say if we have a welder who's been offered a salary of 34,000, he's currently working, or currently living in Ireland and potentially working in Ireland under stamp 1G, and he has the relevant qualification or experience having worked as in the welding industry in the past. In this case, he will be eligible for a general employment permit. Why? Because the welding occupation is not under the critical skill occupation list, and the salary is 34,000 as well. So therefore, he will be only eligible for a general employment permit. And that process will take 2 months. And then once the process is done, then they'll transfer to a stamp 1. And again, under that entire process, there's no interruption to the employment because they're transferring from 1G to a 1. Both are working visas. Now, if we look at this example again, let's say if this welder is someone who has 10 or 20 years experience, and instead of getting a salary of 34,000, if he was to get a salary of, let's say, 64,000 or more, in this scenario, we would forget about the job occupation having to be on the critical skill list. We can forget about the third level requirement. Because of the 64,000 or higher salary, he would automatically fall for the critical skill occupation, just simply because the salary is above the 64 criteria, which is, so we're looking at the second pathway of the critical skill occupation list. Okay, and the last example we'll look at is an interesting one. Let's say if we have a healthcare assistant who's been offered a job at 27,000 or more, in this case, they would fall under the general employment permit. We mentioned that the general employment permit has a minimum salary of 34,000. However, there is an exception, and that exception is with the healthcare assistant role, where their minimum salary is still remaining at 27,000 or higher. And once they meet the salary requirement, provided that they have, of course, the relevant qualification or experience, and they have a valid visa currently in Ireland, then they apply for a general employment permit, which will take 2 months. And while that's happening in the background, there's a transfer of their stamp 1G visa to a stamp 1 once the permit is approved, with no interruption to the employment. So I've talked about some of the requirements and the procedures from the candidate's end and what they need. So from the company's end and HR professionals' end, what does the company need to look at? What is the requirement from the company's end? And in fact, there's only a few of them. Number one, the company needs to be registered and traded in Ireland. Number two is the so-called 50 and 50 rule, 50-50 rule or 50-50 ratio. What it's looking for is that an employment permit will not be granted to a company unless 50% or more of its existing employee are EU national at the time of making the employment permit application. So I'll repeat again, an employment permit will not be granted unless the company's existing employee, 50% of them are EU national at the time of the application. And therefore, we have the 50-50 ratio. And the third requirement, of course, is that when you're making the offer, the salary requirement must be met. So the salary requirement for most general employment permit will be 34,000 or higher, or 38,000 or higher. And this salary requirement was recently changed in January of 2024 as well, when there was during that expansion of the work permit system. So lastly, I just want to cover some of the very common questions that we get asked quite a lot by HR professionals and business. One of them is around stamp 1G holders, as I have covered slightly at the beginning, is can we employ the stamp 1G holders? And the answer is a yes, certainly yes. Once the 1G holders onboarded and working away, we just need to make sure that before the stamp 1G expire, they're able to transfer to a work permit, which enabled them to get a stamp 1 and keep on renewing their visa like that. The second question we get asked a lot is around trusted partnership scheme. So this is an initiative by the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, which is designed to simplify the work permit process for companies who will be using their system on a regular basis. So let's say if you're planning to apply for 5 or 10 or 20 work permit in the coming year. And once the trusted partnership status is approved for your company, you will receive a unique reference number. And in your future work permit applications, you would apply as a trusted partner using that reference number. And all of your application form will be shortened and the application processing time will be fast-tracked. And sometimes the processing time could be halved. So instead of waiting for 4 weeks, you'll be waiting for 2 weeks. So it is a very good initiative which the government encouraged companies to use their system to hire from non-EU nationals and to make sure the positions are filled. Another question we get asked a lot is, once the permit is approved, what happens if there's a change in the terms of employment? In fact, there's very little that needs to be done. If there's change in employment, such as a salary change or a change of work location or a promotion, all you got to do is to email the department in an email outlining the changes, and they will acknowledge it and record it on the system. And lastly is the 12-month rule. We get asked a lot on this, is because there's a policy in place where that if a foreign national is granted an employment permit for the first time in the country, he or she is expected to stay with the initial employer for the first 12 months of the employment permit. And employment permits are generally granted for a duration of 2 years. So in the first year, they will be expected to stay with their initial employer. And of course, after the initial 12 months, the candidate or the employee can decide to change to a different company. However, they must apply for a brand new employment permit. So each employment permit is tied to that employer for that employee. And if they want to change, they have to apply for a brand new employment permit before they can move to the next job with the next employer. Okay. So this concludes my presentation for today. I hope I've made it as helpful and simple for you to understand. We are open to questions for the audience, but if you are interested in arranging a separate call with me or have any questions that you want to discuss with me in private, feel free to contact me using the contact detail on the screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dale. That was certainly very informative, and yeah, I think you helped simplify that quite a bit in terms of just breaking it down. Something that occurred to me there while I was watching that. So, were you talking about the criteria for someone to get the work permit? Is it just that tick box in terms of eligibility, or do you think that there are other things you see that also come up, or what else can go wrong during an application process?
What else could go wrong? So we're talking about the risk of these application process.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, with the government department, each of the permit type, whether it's general work permit or critical skill work permit, there is very strict requirement specifically on each the procedure that needs to be taken, and they have to be followed. To give an example, for a general work permit, they have to follow through with the labor market test requirement, and that requires the job posting to be published for a certain amount of days on certain platforms with certain wordings in it. And they will look at all of these details to make sure that it's done correctly each step of the way. Otherwise, you may risk a refusal of the work permit. And of course, it is our job, being your immigration consultant, to guide you through that process so that you don't have to worry about the risk.
Okay, very good. In my experience, and I guess since we began working, closely with you, Dale, is, I always advise clients to look at the outset to explore this avenue, because I guess we try to consult first and say, look, typically we'll find a lot of the pools are here and here, and we kind of outlined a lot of the talent maps of available pools, and ones where we see that there's a high availability of talent who may require this. We do advise, engage with us, engage with someone like Dale. Dale, we often do a consultation at the start, say, if we go down this path, here's what's involved with us. And we also guide right through the process. So I would say certainly explore that, find out at the start and assess, is that the right option? Because you don't want to ignore it, go through a process, realize you can't find people, you lose time, and then you're back to that. So we're seeing quite a number of interesting questions coming through here. First one I see, Dale, as an employer, how difficult is it to manage the visa application myself?
It can be quite complicated and daunting if you're not familiar with the process. So I think if you're the manager yourself, first be familiar with it, either speaking with yourself or checking the official source from the government website. But as I mentioned, there are places where there's risk in getting the application procedure wrong. So I definitely would recommend to check out and do research in advance. And if you're not confident with it, seek professional help.
Yes. Okay, very good. One of the things we come across quite a bit are 1G spousal dependent visas. So what are the risks of hiring somebody who's currently has a 1G spousal visa?
Good question. So I think in the presentation we mentioned 1G, someone who's a graduate in Ireland. You can also get a 1G if you're a spouse to a critical skill permit holder already, right? So that still allow the individual, the stamp 1G holder, to work indefinitely in Ireland once they can renew their visa and once their spouse who's holding a critical skill permit is able to renew their visa, because that 1G holder's visa is dependent on their spouse's visa as well. But what we sometimes see is that the risk is with, let's say if there's a change of circumstance with their spouse's visa, in which they're dependent on. If there's a change in the spouse's critical skill visa, then this stamp 1G's visa will be impacted. So that is the risk involved. So I would say a simple solution is that if someone who's on a 1G spouse visa and they're working away, it might be better for the 1G spouse visa holder to apply for an employment permit based on their own right, so that they're no longer dependent on their spouse. So should in any circumstance a change happens and their spouse's situation, it's not going to impact their own stamp. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And what is a labor market needs test?
Yeah, the labor market need test, as I mentioned a little bit there, is a procedure that's required usually for a general employment permit. And it means that the job opportunity needs to be made available to Irish and EA national first through a series of job postings.
Sorry, Dale, I think we just lost visuals on you there.
Oh,
there we go.
I was saying that the labor market need procedure is a procedure where it's generally required for a general employment permit. And it means that the job opportunity needs to be made available to the Irish and the EA national first through a series of job posting for a total duration of 1 month. And if the employer feels that there's no suitable candidate from the EA national emerges from these job postings, then they will submit the general employment permit. So it is a separate procedure that's needed as part of the general work permit. It's not needed for critical skill employment permit.
Okay. Another one here is, what if I hire a worker who does not pass their probation and for whatever reason I need to let them go? What happens to that worker?
Yeah, again, it's quite simple. It's quite similar to how you would do the same with somebody who's Irish or EA national as well. You just carry out the normal procedure of letting the person go. And in addition to that, you just drop an email to the department to inform of the situation, and the department will cancel their work permit.
Okay, brilliant. Here's a question. So what are the time limits on a work visa? Once a person is successfully transferred from a stamp 1G to a visa, how often does this need to be renewed?
Yeah, so their work permit application will depend on the duration of the employment contract that they're offered. So for a critical skill permit, they only would issue in for a 2-year duration. And for general employment permit, it could be anything between 6 to 24 months. However, in most practical sense, most employer would offer a 2-year or a permanent contract, and the individual will get a 2-year employment permit. And then after the 2 years, they will renew.
Great. Another one here. So do all staff with a salary greater than 64,000 become eligible as a default for critical skills application?
I would say yes, except the government has a list of ineligible list of occupations. So there is a list of occupations that are not eligible for work permit at all. So if the staff occupation is not within the ineligible list, then your answer is yes. They will be default to critical skill employment permit. The ineligible list, to give a bit of background, is mainly focusing on occupations within the clerical or the admin occupations. And the full list is also available on the government's website as well, if you just simply search for ineligible list of occupations for work permit.
Brilliant. In the UK, a company has to register to be a sponsor, which has costs and timelines associated with it before they can start the visa process for any individuals. Is there anything similar in Ireland?
No. And good question. No, because we dealt with a couple of UK cases in the past. I'm aware of the situation in Ireland. If you fulfill the requirements that I've mentioned in the slide there, if you're a registered trading company and you have EEA nationals, more than the number of non-EEA nationals currently in the company, and you're able to offer the job at the salary requirement, you do not need to apply to become a sponsor or anything else in advance to it. You can just move straight away to a work permit procedure.
Brilliant. So a question here from somebody who looks like they're doing quite a number of applications. So in regards to general work permits, some are rejected and some are accepted, but all are exactly the same candidate type in terms of skill set, labor needs test. How do we get around the differences in rejection? It seems to be depending on who the application is being managed by in the immigration department. We get a refund, but we have to do the application again.
Yes, so there seems to be two parts to that question. Now, number one, yes, it does depend on the candidate's profile as well. So if you recall on the presentation I mentioned, they need to have the relevant qualification and experience, and you really need to highlight that in the application to almost convince the processing officer to look at these and say, yes, all the boxes are being ticked. And the second part of the question, I do agree that in certain scenarios where a couple applications of the same nature, same profile, when they're looking at different processing officers, they may get varied decisions. And unfortunately, in those circumstances, if you do get appealed and you feel that it should be approved, what you could do is you could always file for an appeal application and get the application to be reviewed by a supervisor within.
Okay, brilliant. Is the 34,000 salary for general work permits based on a certain amount of hours per week?
Correct, yes. The salary that I mentioned, which is 34 for general, 38 for critical, or the 64 for critical, they are based on 39-hour standard week. And of course, if you were to have, let's say, more hours, then you have to increase the salary accordingly.
Another one here. We do not require a degree for many of our more entry-level roles, where typically we see most of our 1G applicants. Does this mean they are not eligible for the critical skills visa?
Entry-level roles. Depending on the type of roles, I would say, let's say if it's an entry-level role to be I don't know, IT specialist or software engineers, and the salary is above 38,000. Yes, the job title could be called junior software engineer, and the person have a third-level degree, and they have a salary of 38K. Yes, that would be critical skill, definitely. We've actually done a couple of junior civil engineers or junior project managers. Yes, they will be critical skill.
But they would need to have a degree, is that right?
Correct. Yes, a relevant degree as well. And an interesting case, let's say if you're applying for a software engineer, salary is at 38,000, but the degree or the master is in business or finance, and they haven't had the individual might have a career change and decide to pursue a software engineer, and they might have the experience for it, but then there is a strict requirement on a relevant third-level degree, so it has to be within the software IT industry as well.
Okay, brilliant. And it kind of ties into this one. Does the 1G holder need to work in the industry or role that their college qualification is for?
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to, but for the purpose of the critical skill, the answer is yes. Going back to that example, let's say we have a software engineer and 38,000, okay, but let's say he had a business or finance background, then he won't meet the requirement for a critical skill, but he will meet the requirement for a general employment permit. You can certainly apply for a general employment permit instead.
Yes, okay. Probably one of the things we see sometimes are where a candidate is interested in a position that we have, which is not what they're qualified for. So it's around, okay, they may use their 1G for a certain period of time, but their ability to translate across to a critical skills or general work permit may not be as likely perhaps as someone who's qualified in that area. And we normally try and advise the candidates to
True.
pursue something that is more likely for them to be able to get that. A question that a couple of people are putting through, we are recording the session. We will be able to share a recording of that. We'll also be posting the Q&A and answers and snippets of it on our social media. So please do follow those. Likewise, please feel free to contact us if any of the questions you have are more complex that can be answered on this particular session. We're happy to have any of those conversations offline as well. Let me see. We've a lot coming through here. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. There's a lot of duplication on those. But as I mentioned, please do feel free to contact us directly in any of those. We're also keen to keep up our series of Q&As specifically around this topic. So we are very keen to get your feedback as well, just to understand what are the matters that are most important to you, that you would like to see us share or do a similar sort of future webinar series on. So once again, thank you everybody for coming on today. I hope it's something that you feel that has been very, very beneficial. And yes, look, as I said, please do. Actually, one last question that's come through. Can you advise on any work permit policies for organizations?
What kind of policy are you referring? What do you refer to?
I think probably that's a good question to ask us offline, because I think when you're considering that into the overall HR perspective, there's quite a lot of things that can also be impacted upon that. But certainly happy to have that sort of conversation again. Brilliant. All right. Well, Dale, as always, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you everybody for coming on. And yes, have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye
everyone.
bye.
Bye-bye.